Board will come out of closed session, and is there a motion to come out of closed session?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Akers, seconded by Mr. Seeley to come out of closed session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Mr. Popowitz, do you certify that only those things within closed session were discussed?
I so certify.
Mr. Seeley?
I so certify.
Mr. Akers?
I so certify.
And I so certify. Okay, that takes us to actually our regular board meeting, and at this point in time, we'll do the invocation. You were last. All right, well, I'll do it. All right, if you will pray with me, let us pray. Dear Father God, we come before you this day to thank you for your many blessings, to thank you for your mercy, and to thank you for your grace. Dear Father God, you've told us where two or more are gathered in your name, you will be there also. And we gather in your name tonight. Ask that you would come with us, give us your loving grace, grant us the wisdom to do what's right for the county, and touch our hearts, Lord, so that we can all understand we're all here to do what's best for the county. Help us do what's right. Help us do what's your will and not our will. These and all things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Now, if you join for the Pledge of Allegiance. Maybe not. Okay. Our first agenda item will be the, first we don't have any amendments. That's correct. Okay. Board comments, Mr. Popowitz?
Yes, I'd like to mention Ms. Hall, who's been hospitalized. Is that correct, Mr. Ashcraft? I haven't heard an update on that, Mr. Ashcraft, but if you would please pass along my heartfelt sympathy to her family and tell her to get well soon.
Sure will. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Mr. Popowitz echoed the sentiments. Mrs. Hall, I understand, is doing better, but still in the hospital. I also have got an invitation, I'm not sure if the rest of the board got it, for the regional elected officials meeting in March in Fredericksburg. It's for Planning District 16 from the Executive Director of the George Washington Regional Council. I think you get to respond directly. You got it? Okay, you got one? You and Mr. A. Yeah, Mr. A, because they're on the GWC. Okay, so you should get that. If you don't, I'll make sure it gets forwarded to you. Okay. All righty. Agenda item 1, Mr. Parton, that's you.
Would you like me to read the resolution?
If you would.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we have for the board's consideration tonight a resolution entitled "A Resolution Declaring the Month of February African American History Month in Caroline County," and it reads as follows. Whereas the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States of America includes numerous accomplishments and contributions of African Americans, and whereas Caroline County in particular has been fortunate to benefit from the contributions of its native sons and daughters of African descent, and whereas the contributions of these Caroline natives are noteworthy and have benefited not only Caroline County, but in many cases the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States as well. And whereas the contributions of African Americans often go unnoticed and underappreciated by many Americans, and whereas it is important and fitting to recognize and celebrate the significant role African Americans have played in the development of our great country, state, and nation. Now therefore be it resolved, the Caroline County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims the month of February as African American History Month in Caroline County in conjunction with our national celebration, and encourages county residents to take advantage of the presentations, displays, and other materials available to learn more about the contributions of African Americans. Presented for the board's consideration this 10th day of February 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Parton. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Pompowitz, seconded by Mr. Seeley. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you again, Mr. Parton. Agenda item number 2, presentations, reports. Understand the registrar was willing to wait a month, considering the agenda for today. So that would push us to the sheriff's proposed vehicles. Sheriff?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I believe we had a discussion a week or so ago about the vehicles and wanted more information, Mr. Thomas, that you requested, and we put that together to send it to you. Presently, we're asking for 17 vehicles that have more than 120,000, with some of them ranging up to 160, 70,000. We've asked for that many. It's a need. It's not a want. And keep in mind, because this went along with the planning that our county administrator put in for emergency vehicles, we will need an additional 8 by next year too. So we're just throwing that out to you. And if there's any questions, all the equipment, and hopefully we're able to get the Fords. They're the 2011s. And with that being a 2011, we're able to utilize some of the equipment that we have now, such as the light bars, the cages, all that will be able to go into it. The 2012s that are coming out will cost the county more money, anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 more per car, and you cannot use this equipment. So that's what we're proposing, and that's the need that we have.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Any questions?
Seeley?
We've already purchased 3 new cars, correct? We did that at the beginning of the fiscal year.
3 or 4, that is correct.
Is it?
It was 4, yes, sir.
4.
So are we doing 17 minus 4, or are we doing 17
17
plus 4?
17 more because of our needs of where we are. We actually have 25 vehicles that have more than 120,000.
Sheriff, I'm not sure whether the mic is not close enough to you or whether the mic just isn't turned up in here, but I really cannot understand what you just, I didn't understand what you just said in response to his.
It is an additional 17 more cars.
Seeley, were you done?
Yes.
Mr. Akers?
I have no questions. We had questions last time. I think the sheriff, Captain, let's see, Major. I get tightly confused. Major Mosier has brought the information back to us. So, if there are no questions and if the motion is in order, that's what we need tonight to give them permission to move ahead with the purchase of these vehicles, so that we can take get the 2012 prices.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure we were going to. Can you give us a second, Sheriff? And I think
Yes, sir.
We'll make that motion a little later.
Okay, and what I wanted to again point out is, in order for us to do this, we have to get that information to Sheehy Ford so that they can order those cars for us. They won't come in till well into 2012.
Can I? I'm gonna ask Mr. Akers. Well, I ask the rest of the board if he'll hold that motion until after we hear the county administrator's budget proposal, just to make sure we all know. It's going to be tonight.
Okay.
Well,
all right.
it'll be while it's dark. It may be after midnight, but it will be tonight, when we hear it. So if you guys can wait till that, I'm sure Mr. Ashcraft will let you know.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess you folks are going to stay because item number 3 is the radio system. And Mr. Partner's worked on that one. And we've got a presentation from the consultant.
Yes, sir. We have with us tonight David Muniz of Federal Engineering, which is the consulting firm that was hired to take a look at the county's radio system. One of the catalysts for the project was the FCC narrowbanding mandate, but I do want to stress that the project goes much deeper than that. Federal has looked at at the deficiencies in our system, and they are numerous. And we're asking that the board There's a relatively easy way to meet the narrowbanding mandate by simply replacing our equipment, our mobile, portable radios, base stations, pagers, and so forth. We would ask the board to take a more broad-based approach. There are deficiencies in the system that will get worse with the narrowbanding. And we see this as a critical public safety infrastructure project and would ask the board to view it in that context. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Muniz.
Hello, and thank you for your time tonight. My name is Dave Muniz with Federal Engineering, and I'm here to provide some background with regard to our report with regard to your public safety radio system. In the agenda on the slides that I've got, I'm going to touch on the project phases, what we've done to this date, what the next phases are, discuss your existing systems, what our study uncovered, what we were able to identify with regard to your existing systems, the system deficiencies with your system today, and also how they'll be impacted by the narrowbanding mandate. Also, I'll spend some time identifying exactly what the mandate is and how it impacts Caroline County. P25, discuss some of the points that were discussed in our report to the county, provide some alternatives with regard to conceptual design to remedy those issues, and provide some budgetary guidance in terms of overall cost to fix the system itself. From a project's phase standpoint, we started looking at your existing system. We surveyed your existing sites, looking at some of the deficiencies, what works, what doesn't work, how you currently operate with your public safety radio system, what are your needs, what are the user needs in the community, your law enforcement, your fire services, your public works. In addition to that, we looked at the needs in terms of covering the county from a coverage standpoint and providing radio service in the county. With that, we also take a broad view and look at the FCC, the requirements, the vendors and their background information in terms of where they're going with regard to new equipment and new technologies, and how the industry as a whole is moving forward and how it impacts decisions made at the county level with regard to the radio system. Next phase, after reviewing the alternatives and coming up with a decision on how you'd like to proceed, there's procurement support, developing a solicitation package or an RFP package for a competitive procurement, evaluating proposals, negotiating, and ultimately implementing whatever the county elects to do finally to move forward with the radio system project. With regard to the radio system, most of this is in the report, but I'm going to touch on it briefly here. The county currently operates 3 VHF channels. They support sheriff's office, law, fire and rescue, EMS services, and local government. The design of your current system, you have a single transmission site located at the dispatch center in Bowling Green, and you have 4 receive sites which are used to augment the entire system. The technology as a whole is fairly dated. The system was implemented around the early 80s, 1982-83 time frame. And your existing channels, again, I'm touching on it really briefly here, but you've got a sheriff and law enforcement channel. It's a VHF channel. It's a paired channel. County Fire EMS, your paging is running across that. You have a local government's channel, and in addition to the three channels that are also voted and received, you have 2 additional channels located in transmission at the main transmission site for county schools, and a SERS or a mutual aid channel as well. The existing coverage from this system, from a mobile standpoint, which would be radios that are installed in squad cars that don't come out of the vehicles, is about 82% of the county is covered with the radio system currently in its wideband form. Portable coverage, the portable law enforcement radios or portable radios as you exit a vehicle and respond to a scene, the county is covered currently with about 42% of the county. From a service level, It's identified as a digital audio quality, or the level of service. That's at 3.4, which means that speech is understood with very few repetitions required for this analog system at that coverage level. System deficiencies that you currently have. One of the most critical deficiencies you currently have is your design has a single transmission point with no alternate transmission point. If your main transmission tower were to fail, communications in the county would be inoperable. We identified in our survey that the main transmission tower located at Bowling Green has foundation issues that need to be remedied, either by the replacement of the tower or some foundation work to support and shore up that existing tower. One of the other things we discovered in surveying your equipment is the equipment that you currently operate with is out of production. Motorola Quantar radios, which are the core radios of your system, will be out of production November of this year. So what that will do in impacting you moving forward is replacement equipment will become more difficult to attain, and the main vendor, Motorola, will stop supporting the system in approximately 5 to 7 years. One of the other issues you have is identified that you currently have had interference with some of your channels, and there is congestion with the amount of users on those 3 channels that you currently operate on. Another main problem with the system is it provides inadequate coverage. Public safety communications are designed to typically 95% countywide coverage at a audio quality of 3.4. As it presently stands, you're below that threshold from a design standpoint. Some of this is also in the alternatives report that we provided, but this is your existing VHF coverage and wideband analog. The green represents your portable coverage around the county. To the left-hand side of the screen, your yellow indicates your mobile coverage and your reliability within that area. The map to the right shows your current pager coverage within the county. And you can kind of see it's all circled around that main transmission site, inherent in the single transmission site design that the county currently operates under. I think it's important to discuss what the FCC's mandate is, what it's about, and how it impacts you. The FCC is mandated, the mandate was issued in 1996. All licenses in the VHF and UHF band, all licenses operating between 150 megahertz and 512 megahertz, which impacts the frequencies that the county currently operates on, must be narrow-banded to one voice 12.5 kilohertz of bandwidth prior to January 1st of 2013. I think it's important to note why the FCC issued a mandate to narrowband. The narrowband mandate was in the 1996 timeframe. Public safety agencies, government, and the FCC understood and identified that additional spectrum would be required for public safety. The congestion in the VHF band limits the amount of additional channels available. So one of the solutions for that is narrowbanding, in essence, and I have a slide that follows which kind of shows what narrowbanding is or what it does to the frequencies. In addition to that, they also provided additional spectrum within the 700 megahertz band for public safety use, and they also provided an additional band within 700, which they call D block, which is for, you may have seen banted around the news, for the national broadband plan and some of the discussions with regard to that. They also have provided spectrum within the 800 megahertz frequency band as well, and some of that was impacted by Sprint Nextel and rebanding. But how it relates to Caroline County, the narrowbanding mandate requires that you must do something with your existing system and its channels. The FCC has reaffirmed the deadline. I know one of the questions I typically get asked, how firm is that date? Will it move? The date has been reaffirmed a number of times. They've actually put some teeth to it. There's some potential fines of up to $10,000 per day if you operate outside of the required narrowbanding spectrum requirements. And there is the possibility of actually losing your license to operate in that frequency completely. The graphic I have in front just basically shows the green is the current wideband channel spacing and what the FCC is trying to accomplish by narrowbanding, creating basically 2 channels within each currently existing wideband channel. It's not as simple to say once they finish narrowbanding in VHF, there'll be twice as much spectrum available for twice as many channels. VHF is also impacted by the fact that the pairs are not actually paired together. So you have a transmit frequency up one side of the spectrum, you may have a receive at another side. UHF 700 and 800 actually have been allocated in paired spectrum. So when you get a license to operate in UHF 700 or 800, it automatically has a receive channel a certain distance apart, and they're paired together, and that helps immensely for interference, it helps immensely for licensing, and will actually show greater additional spectrum in those bands. I'm touching on the current systems issues again, and this is with regard to how the narrowbanding impact will additionally impact your existing system. The same issues still exist with your system as a single point of failure with the one transmission site. Your equipment is at the end of life. Your equipment can currently be narrowbanded. You will have to replace your user radios throughout the county, however, you can narrowband your existing system. I think it's important to note it's at the end of its support cycle from Motorola, number 1, and number 2, the narrowbanding initiative or plan or stage from the FCC does not actually stop at 12.5 kilohertz spacing. They've already moved to 6.25 kilohertz spacing for the 700 megahertz band, and that is the ultimate end plan for VHF and UHF and 800 as well. So in essence, this equipment will not be able to make the next step to 6.25 spacing if you narrowband your existing equipment. Some other issues, the majority of your subscribers will need to be replaced with regard to operating if you continue to operate in VHF. Most of the subscribers in the county will not actually accommodate the narrowbanding channeling and will need to be replaced. Another major issue with narrowbanding is the interference issues that you've experienced today may become exacerbated upon narrowbanding. What you're in essence doing is you're taking a bandwidth space that is a certain distance and you're compressing it down. Any interference that was existing on that frequency prior to that narrowbanding will impact the system at a slightly greater rate. The other issue with narrowbanding your existing system, just as an analog system, your actual coverage footprint will actually be reduced slightly, probably about 5 to 10%, based on studies that we've looked at and experience that we've had with other agencies and counties that have done that and moved on to this approach. So next up, I'm going to talk about the conceptual design, some of the elements to it, but I'm going to touch base on some general terminology, and I'm going to try to go into a little more detail on it. There's 3 real options for the county. You can narrowband your existing system, and I'm going to go into detail with that and provide some budgetary pricing associated with that. In addition to that, you could implement a system operating in either UHF or 700 megahertz. There is spectrum available in both of those bands to implement a new system. P25 is an actual standard. I'll try to explain that to you in one of the next slides here, just so that it doesn't become letters and numbers mumbo jumbo and trunking.
It's probably a little bit too late for that.
Yeah, I understand that. I expect a lot of questions afterwards.
So can I ask you to do this? If you could give us the options.
Yeah, we can move ahead.
And what those options benefits would be.
All right.
And then we can probably discuss costs and things of those.
Sure,
I think
absolutely.
that might be more beneficial.
Well, let me just touch on Project 25. I'll just skip real quickly. It's a standard. It's basically like electrical standard, Belcore standard. It's important for me to at least address it and touch on it because one of the big implications are, while P25 is not mandated by the FCC for this next phase, all grant applications require P25 to be considered for funds. So it's something the county needs to be aware of.
Excellent.
I can basically skip this slide. In essence, this is discussing why the alternatives were there, how we touched on it, but there are 3 different alternatives, and I'll expand on it in a little further here. Trunking is the more efficient use of it. Your local telephone companies have been employing trunking in their main design for quite some time. You work with talk groups instead of individual channels, but I'm going to skip here to your existing system coverage. The map you see in front of you is the narrow banding of your existing system. Nothing more, nothing less. The coverage that you're seeing here is roughly 5% less than your current wideband system. It doesn't resolve any of the other issues with a single transmission site, although when I did provide my budgetary pricing, and I'll get to that, it does include the cost of replacing the existing Bowling Green tower. I did include that because it is something that, at minimum, the county needs to do. Your paging coverage is to the left, your mobile and portable coverage is in the image to the right. One of your first options, other than just narrowbanding your existing system, is to implement a UHF system. To the left, you've got the comparison of your existing system coverage as narrowbanded in comparison to a UHF system. It's a 6-site design. It's a conceptual design because the next real phase is to actually put this into an RFP and require that the vendors identify the sites that are best suited to provide the most coverage, rather than dictating to the vendors what sites to select. The reason for that is pretty simple. They may be able to utilize and guarantee coverage with 5 sites. And if we handcuff them and provide them with 6 sites that they absolutely must use, they'll provide a response with 6 sites. So as opposed to providing a detailed requirements list that they use 6 sites, 10 sites, or mandate that, the functional requirements are that it provides 95% coverage throughout the county at a service level of 3.4 DAQ, which is an appropriate service level for public safety communications. If you can take a look at the maps, obviously the portable and mobile coverage cover the entire county, far superior to what you have today. Same comparison here with the 700 megahertz. 700 megahertz requires more sites. Our coverage design that you see here is very conservative. There is a wide discrepancy in the results that you're going to see on a competitive RFP from vendors. However, you should see less than 12 sites, which is what's identified there. You may see as few as 10 sites. There are some new repeaters out from some of the vendors that are linear that are actually much more efficient. With that said, the overall price in a competitive procurement tends to move down. Included in the costing and what we looked at is infrastructure, the radio equipment, a paging channel, backhaul, which is the ability for these towers to communicate with each other. It's done via microwave typically. Replacement dispatch consoles, which are also at the end of their life expectancy and about to go out of production. Alarms, and obviously the communication tower sites, the shelters that are associated with to house the equipment at the locations to build the system. Where you really want to go is the pricing sheet here. What I'm providing here is budgetary pricing. A competitive RFP will actually move these prices considerably. Differences from this as much as 20 to 25% are not uncommon in a competitive RFP. A lot of that is dictated by where the companies are in their procurement cycle, what their business strategy is in the area, among other things. Narrowbanding the existing system, no improvements other than replacing the tower, narrowbanding your equipment, replacing subscribers that are not capable of narrowbanding currently, is a little over $2 million. That doesn't address any coverage issues. Your coverage will actually diminish about 5% over what you have today. Doesn't resolve any of your interference issues. The product is still at the end of its life cycle, so support and continued service, maintenance of the equipment is going to be increasingly more difficult to sustain. And finally, there is no path to the next phase, P25 Phase 2, so implementing and narrowbanding your existing system will bring you back to the table here to discuss your next step again at a later date. That date has not yet been identified by the FCC, just to be clear. The two other alternatives, there's a UHF alternative. It is less expensive because it requires less sites. There is improved coverage with that. That is a 95% coverage throughout the county. It adds additional capacity because it utilizes trunking and the latest technology. UHF is less susceptible to interference than VHF in as much as that the channels are paired. There is still quite a bit of congestion on UHF, but we were able to identify what appeared to be 5 or 6 channels that would be available to implement a system like this. But one of the risks is you do have to license that spectrum, so that is a risk that the county needs to be aware of. 700 megahertz gives you all the same benefits: improved coverage, capacity, performance, and interoperability. One of the big key advantages of 700 megahertz is that it's clean, brand new spectrum. It was created and allocated specifically for public safety. And in addition to that, the spectrum itself was actually planned across the country. There are regional planning committees that were put in place to allocate that on a state-by-state basis so that the frequencies can be reused more efficiently and don't interfere with each other. The downside is 700 megahertz. It doesn't travel as far. It does have better building penetration. However, you require additional sites for the same level of coverage. I want to emphasize it's specifically with regard to 7 and 800. The latest equipment, the new linear repeaters, are going to drive that cost down significantly. You may see 2 fewer sites, maybe 3 fewer sites, and the site cost in general is approximately $1 million a site. I'm going to skip to the next slide and then probably come back to this because I think this is where your questions are going to be. But from a overall cost reduction strategies, a competitive procurement is recommended for the county, regardless of the alternative that you'd like to pursue. Competitive procurement is going to allow you to leverage yourself better with the vendors. They'll have to compete with each other to provide the same level of service and meet a minimum set of requirements. Another strategy that we've employed very successfully is separating the actual radio system from the site construction pieces of it. A turnkey project from a vendor XYZ, if they're going to provide towers and shelters, they typically don't do that. So they mark it up and pass that cost on to the county. It's in the county's best interest to split that up. We release them at the same time. However, it allows additional competition and responses from vendors that just supply towers and shelters at a much more competitive price. It also allows the option and the possibility for tower vendors that will build a tower for the county free of charge and lease it back if they are unable to get any other cellular carries, let's say, on that same tower site. Some other ways you can save money on this is, of course, value engineering and negotiations. In a competitive procurement, you have multiple vendors in there. You can leverage yourself over those. And in our case, we also have background with additional procurements around the country where we've been very successful in using our experience and our knowledge of other similar system responses to lower overall prices. 5 to 10% off of the initial response is not uncommon. Another option for the county, which is not exclusive of the RFP process, is regional partnerships. Nationally, all public safety agencies are in the same boat as Caroline County, and they need to do something to meet the narrowband mandate. And there are a number of systems, both recently installed, about to be installed, out for RFP in the area, and vendors are considering regional partnerships where you can share or defray some of the cost of maintenance moving forward and core infrastructure pieces. As an example, 2 counties or 3 counties sharing a common system don't necessarily need to pay for the same core electronics 3 times. So that could be a potential savings of, depending on the system vendor, up to somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million to $1.5 million, depending on the system vendor and how their actual architecture works. Another alternative, another piece to actually impacting the overall price of the project is grant funding. Obviously, P25 is required for that. All the interoperability of the new system will score higher in grant opportunities for the county itself to defray some of the costs. One of the more successful areas in getting grant funding on a federal level, obviously, are subscriber levels, and the county has had success with subscriber grants in the past. So I guess I'm going to stop back to here and really open it up for questions, because I'm sure you have some. And
Thank you very much for that, and
you're quite welcome.
thank you for not delving into too much technical detail.
I tried not to. I tried to leave it at a fairly high level.
We did appreciate that. Okay. Mr. Popowitz, we'll start with you. Questions?
Mr. Muniz, would you suggest us putting RFPs out for both the 700, 800, and the UHF system?
I do.
Okay.
I do. The reason behind that is there are a number of regional systems that you could possibly partner with. If you have your own responses back from the vendors, while you still may ultimately decide to partner with another system going in, you've negotiated your own best deal, which may be better than a piggyback situation. As in the case of one of the projects I'm currently working on in Cortland County, we did exactly that. We actually provided for alternate responses, required that. The county is ultimately procuring the system via piggyback. However, the negotiated prices they have are significantly lower than the neighboring system that they're piggybacking off of because of the responses they received. So they were able to lower the cost of their infrastructure for towers and shelters significantly, almost in half, and for the radio system and subscribers themselves also quite significantly. The other reason for a RFP for those two specific items, the narrowbanding the existing system is a sole source situation. You have Motorola equipment, you will require Motorola equipment to narrowband it. That said, Motorola is likely to provide a response from one of these alternates as well, and you can use that information to also leverage savings on that particular system as well. So the recommendation is for a UHF 700 RFP to go out to the street.
That's it. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it, Mr. Popowitz? That's it? Okay. Mr. Sealy?
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
UHF licensing, you said, came with issues. And I was curious what and why.
Okay. 700 megahertz is allocated. So currently, within the 700 megahertz band, Caroline County is allocated, whether they use it or not, 5 channels.
Right.
You can license them. They are set aside for you. For the UHF system, we've identified a number of frequencies that are available and should be compatible with building a 5-channel system. What you will need to do is actually apply for those licenses. Now, they are public safety licenses. They are separated in spectrum acquisition. They're called Part 90, and you apply for them separately. You're not competing with commercial cellular carriers, you're not competing with paging vendors or anything of the sort. That said, what you are competing with is how far the coverage will go and where the closest system is and how they all play together. That's part of the licensing process.
So we don't know, based on the 5 that we're looking at, what the radius around us is for the usage in those?
The ultimate ERP, or the power level exactly that you're looking at, is not defined until you actually get the frequency. Our modeling used conservative numbers, which is typically granted in terms of a licensing situation. The other point to take out here is we identified 5 to 6 that pair well. We identified a total of 20 channels that are available based on distances from Caroline County that should work. Ultimately, vendor responses will dictate how far they need to be apart from each other to determine the viability of it. But from a licensing standpoint, it is a risk. It is not locked into you until you actually apply for it.
Is there a cost to us applying for those?
There is a cost. It is. It depends on how many sites, and it's one of these situations where it's kind of the horse in the cart. The FCC wants you to identify your system design, where the sites are going to be, what tower heights they're going to be, what antennas you're going to use before they really want you to license. And from a county perspective, you want to know that you have all of the spectrum available to you to build this system. So it's kind of caught in a little bit of in the middle. What I would probably recommend is that you look at, as you get to the RFP and before you get to the award process, if you elect to go with a UHF system, that you actually apply for your frequency licenses based on the system design you're looking at. You can modify it at a much lower cost. From a total cost perspective, the channels can be a little over $1,000 per site, per channel, and it depends on how many channels. We're looking at about 5 channels. Some of that is variable, and I can come up with harder numbers for you and actually give them.
Are transmit and receive considered one channel, or is transmit a channel and receive a channel, so we're actually looking at 10, or are we really looking at 5?
With UHF, transmit and receive are one channel, so you're actually looking at 5.
So
And they're
they
trumped.
consider send and receive,
Yeah.
transmit and receive one channel?
Yeah, one channel, 2 frequencies, but yes, one channel.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm making
good
sure
question.
We're not going to buy 10,
Yeah,
we're going to buy 5.
correct. For UHF. And for VHF, it's slightly different because they're not paired. So it would actually be 10 for VHF, but they're not available in the VHF band, so it's kind of a moot point.
Okay. Hanover, King and Queen, Essex. Have you worked with any of those counties with the same situation?
King and Queen, we actually were the engineering consultant for King and Queen County, and we work with them entirely through the process until their acceptance of their UHF system.
So how far along are they?
They're online currently.
And they chose,
UHF.
and they chose which UHF system? I mean,
From a vendor perspective,
from a configuration perspective.
they went conventional 3-channel, and they're in the process currently of looking at partnering or becoming a regional system with potentially King William. But they went with a UHF conventional system, 3-channel system,
700 megahertz?
UHF.
Okay. Any chance we could piggyback any of the towers that they have? Are they close enough to the county line for us for repeaters?
Their closest repeater does not actually provide adequate coverage into your county. So the answer to that would be, is it direct piggyback and partnering without something in the middle? No. Potentially, if there is a regional system that ties in King William in between it and ties all 3 together, that's potentially possible, yes.
Is King William, do you know if they are in this process also, or are they?
There are RFPs out on the street currently, and I believe they're expecting responses later this month.
Okay.
Hanover is 800 megahertz, and they're in operation currently. In relation to Caroline County, you really have systems in almost every band that surround you. You have 800 megahertz systems, there are 700 megahertz systems near enough in proximity, and there are UHF systems in your proximity, as well as obviously the state system is also a VHF system. So from an interoperability standpoint, regardless of which band you select, you're going to need to put some type of accommodation to talk to every other band in the system.
What is the state police using?
VHF.
Do they have any towers in the county?
I believe they do. I don't know the quantity. It's part of the STARS system. Yeah, do you know, is it more than one? I know it's,
I don't know for sure, Jeff, but they have the ability to.
yeah, the VDOT towers.
Cell towers.
Yeah.
Well, no. I'm just curious if there is any advantage to us choosing the same system the state police.
Your issue with the VHF is that you don't have any additional spectrum to expand your system out beyond your current 3 channels. So, in essence, what you're doing is narrow banding what you've got. That would leave you on the same band as the state police. However, you have no capability of expanding your system and gaining additional channels to rectify the congestion and interference problems you currently have on that band.
Somewhere in this we're going to have to sacrifice. What I'm trying to figure out is where.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my last question is name brand versus off-name brand, Motorola versus who else makes equipment that's not, you know, on the pages of every magazine?
Realistically, you've got multiple vendors. What you're really looking for is a P25 system. You want it to be a standards-based system because that pushes you towards interoperability. P25 is a lot like Bell Core standards. If you have a P25 radio, a Kenwood,